The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and regret, and Maya Anderson had learned to recognize both within her first week as a palliative care nurse. She pushed her cart down the hallway of St. Catherine's Medical Center, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as she reviewed the patient files for her shift. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, casting long shadows that made the corridor feel less clinical, more human. Maya had worked in hospice care for 3 years now, and while most people found her career choice depressing, she considered it sacred work. Being present for someone's final chapter, ensuring dignity and comfort when medicine could no longer cure that mattered. Her supervisor, Linda, caught her at the nurse's station with an apologetic expression that immediately put Maya on alert. "We have a new patient in 412, Linda said, handing over a thick file. "High-profile case. He specifically requested someone with your experience." Maya flipped open the folder, scanning the medical history. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer metastasized to the liver. Prognosis: 3 to 6 months, possibly less. The name at the top made her pause. Preston James. "Wait, the Preston James?" Maya looked up, her brown eyes wide. "The real estate developer," Linda nodded. "His company built half the downtown skyline. He's 42, Maya. Never married, no kids. His assistant said he wanted someone professional but personable. I immediately thought of you." Maya's stomach twisted with familiar grief. 42 was too young. Hell, 92 was too young when you got down to it, but 42 was barely living. She took a deep breath and nodded. "What's his care plan?" "Pain management, mostly. He's refused aggressive treatment, just wants to be comfortable." Linda squeezed Maya's shoulder. "I know this one's going to be hard, but you're the best we have for cases like this." Walking toward room 412, Maya reminded herself of the boundaries she'd established early in her career. Compassion without attachment, presence without possession. She'd seen too many nurses burn out from carrying the weight of every patient's story. But as she knocked softly and entered the room, all her careful preparation scattered like leaves in wind. Preston James sat in the chair by the window, not in the hospital bed where she'd expected him. He was tall even seated, with dark hair that had just begun to gray at the temples and sharp features that would have been severe if not for the weariness in his blue eyes. He wore expensive pajamas, not a hospital gown, and was reading a leather-bound book that he set aside when she entered. "You must be Maya," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly steady for someone with his diagnosis. "Linda said you were excellent." "I'm going to do my best to keep you comfortable," Maya replied, setting her bag down and pulling out her tablet to review his medications. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I'm dying." The bluntness was offset by a slight quirk of his lips. "Sorry, I've decided I'm done with euphemisms. The whole fighting the good fight thing feels dishonest at this point." Maya appreciated the directness. She'd spent too many shifts dancing around the truth because families couldn't accept it. "Fair enough. Pain level 1 to 10, 6, 7 when I move wrong." She noted it, adjusting his medication schedule. "I'll talk to Dr. Morrison about increasing your dosage." "There's no reason you should be suffering." "Suffering," Preston repeated, looking back out the window at the city skyline he'd helped create. "Interesting word choice. My father would say suffering builds character." Of course, he also chain-smoked for 40 years and died at 55, so his health advice is questionable. Maya finished her notes and moved to check his vitals. His pulse was weak but steady, blood pressure low. As she wrapped the cuff around his arm, she noticed his hands strong, calloused despite his wealth. Builder's hands, not just an executive's. "Did you work construction?" she asked. Preston looked surprised. "For 10 years before I started my own company. How did you know?" "Your hands." She smiled. My dad was a contractor. You don't get calluses like that from signing papers. Something shifted in his expression, a warmth breaking through the careful control. Most people who have heard of me assume I inherited everything. Truth is, I started framing houses when I was 18. Worked my way up. Over the following days, Maya learned Preston's routines. He woke early, always before the sunrise, and spent an hour reading by the window. He preferred jazz music at low volume. He hated being fussed over but never complained about pain unless directly asked. His assistant, a efficient woman named Claire, visited daily with documents that Preston reviewed with the same intensity he probably gave to negotiations, even though most of it was clearly estate planning now. Maya found herself lingering in his room longer than strictly necessary, drawn by conversations that ranged from architecture to literature to the nature of regret. Preston was wickedly intelligent and unexpectedly funny, with a dry wit that caught her off guard. "Your company is worth billions," Maya said one afternoon while adjusting his Roman 4, "and you're spending your last months in a hospital room. Don't you want to travel, see the world?" Preston was quiet for a long moment. "I traveled constantly for 15 years, built projects in 8 countries. Stayed in the finest hotels, ate at restaurants with Michelin stars." He met her eyes. "None of it meant anything because I was always alone. I chose work over relationships every single time, convinced there would be time later for the personal stuff. Turns out later has an expiration date." The raw honesty made Maya's throat tight. "I'm sorry. Don't be. It was my choice." He paused. "What about you? Why does someone as young as you choose to work in hospice care?" Maya settled into the chair across from him, something she rarely did during shifts. But Preston had a way of making hospital rooms feel like living rooms. "My mom died when I was 19. Cancer. The hospice nurse who cared for her made those final weeks bearable. She was kind and present and treated my mom like a person, not just a patient. I wanted to do that for others." "Your mom was lucky to have you there. I almost wasn't." Maya's voice dropped. "I was in college, had this boyfriend who wanted me to go to Europe with him that summer. I was seriously considering it. Then Mom got sick and suddenly nothing else mattered." She looked at Preston. "I don't regret staying, but I regret needing a crisis to realize what was important." "We're a pair, aren't we?" Preston said softly. "Both learning our lessons too late." As weeks passed, Preston's condition deteriorated. The pain medication increased, his mobility decreased, and the vibrant man she'd first met began to fade. Yet somehow, their connection deepened. Maya started arriving early for her shifts, bringing coffee from the shop Preston mentioned missing. He asked about her life outside the hospital, her tiny apartment, her collection of rescue cats, her sister's upcoming wedding. "You should take time off for that," Preston said one evening. His color was worse today, grayish under the fluorescent lights. "I will. It's not for another month." "Maya." His voice was firm despite his weakness. "Don't make my mistakes. Don't put work before the people you love." She wanted to argue that caring for him wasn't just work, but that felt like crossing a line she'd sworn not to cross. Instead, she adjusted his pillows and changed the subject. But Preston wasn't easily deterred. The next day, during her morning rounds, he asked, "Are you seeing anyone?" Maya nearly dropped the medication cup. "That's personal." "So was everything I've told you about my failed relationships and family drama. Come on, humor a dying man." "You can't play that card every time you want something," Maya protested, but she was fighting a smile. "Watch me." Preston's eyes held a glimmer of his old humor. "So, no, I'm not seeing anyone. Haven't dated seriously in over a year." She busied herself with his chart. "Happy, why not?" "Because I work long hours in a hospital watching people die. And most men don't find that particularly sexy conversation, Maya said, more sharply than intended. Because I'm tired all the time and emotionally drained and apparently unable to maintain appropriate professional boundaries. The last part slipped out before she could stop it. Silence filled the room, heavy and charged. Maya, look at me. Preston waited until she did. You've made the last month of my life bearable, more than bearable. You've made me feel human instead of like a body waiting to quit. If that's you failing at professional boundaries, then thank God you're bad at your job. She laughed despite the tears threatening to form. You're impossible. I'm dying. There's a difference. From that conversation forward, something unspoken shifted between them. Maya stopped pretending their relationship was purely professional, and Preston stopped holding back the affection clear in his eyes when she entered the room. They didn't label it or discuss it, how could they, when the end date was circled in red on every calendar. One night, Maya stayed late after her shift ended. Preston had been having a rough day, his pain barely controlled even with increased medication. She sat beside his bed in the dim light, reading aloud from the book he'd been working through, a collection of poetry he'd never made time for until now. Maya, he interrupted softly. Can I hold your hand? She set the book down and laced her fingers through his. His grip was weak but warm. I need to tell you something, Preston said. And I need you to just listen, not argue or rationalize or do that thing where you deflect with humor. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Okay, I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. I know it's insane. I know the timing is cruel, and maybe it's just because you're here and I'm scared and lonely, but I don't think so. I think if I'd met you 10 years ago in a coffee shop or at some work event, I would have fallen just as hard. Maybe harder, because I wouldn't have had the clarity that dying brings. Tears spilled down Maya's cheeks. Every professional instinct screamed that this was a complication she couldn't afford, but her heart had stopped listening to professional instincts weeks ago. I love you too, she whispered. And I hate it because it's not fair. Neither of us gets enough time. Preston pulled her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with heartbreaking gentleness. Then we don't waste what we have. No more what ifs or should have beens. Just right now. Maya climbed carefully into the hospital bed beside him, mindful of the tubes and wires tethering him to life. Preston wrapped his arm around her, and they lay together in the darkness, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was the most intimate moment of her life, and it happened in a hospice room surrounded by medical equipment. Tell me about your perfect day, Maya said quietly. If you could do anything, go anywhere. Preston was silent for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. I wake up in a house by the ocean, not a mansion, just a real home. You're there and we have coffee on the porch watching the sunrise. We spend the day doing absolutely nothing important, walking on the beach, reading, talking, making dinner together. At night we watch the stars and make plans for tomorrow, confident that tomorrow will actually come. His voice roughened. That's all I want. Nothing extraordinary, just ordinary moments with someone I love. That sounds perfect, Maya managed, though her throat was tight. They fell asleep tangled together, and when the night nurse found them during rounds, she quietly closed the door and said nothing. Some rules were meant to be broken. After that night, Maya and Preston stopped hiding their relationship. Linda pulled her aside with concerned eyes, reminding her about burnout and emotional protection, but ultimately respected Maya's choice. Preston's assistant Claire was more direct. Are you sure about this? Claire asked one afternoon when she found Maya in Preston's room during her lunch break, the two of them playing cards at the bedside table. I've worked for Preston for 8 years. He's a good man, but this situation is complicated, Maya finished. I know. But when has love ever been simple? Claire studied her for a long moment, then nodded. He's happier than I've seen him in years. Thank you for that. As Preston's health declined, their relationship intensified. They talked for hours about everything and nothing: childhood memories, dreams abandoned and dreams discovered, regrets and small triumphs. Preston shared stories about buildings he'd designed, the satisfaction of seeing something he'd envisioned rise from nothing into reality. Maya told him about patients she'd cared for, the lessons they'd taught her about living and letting go. I used to think my work was my legacy, Preston said one afternoon. His voice was weaker now, the cancer stealing his strength day by day. All those buildings with my name on them. But they're just steel and glass. They don't mean anything. They house people, Maya countered gently. Families, businesses, lives being lived, that matters. Maybe. Preston looked at her with such intensity that it made her breath catch. But you've taught me that the real building work is what we do with each other. The connections we make, the love we share. That's the architecture that outlasts us. Maya kissed him softly. Then we've both built something beautiful. They created rituals to mark their time together. Every evening, Maya would read to him novels, poetry, news articles about the world continuing to spin without them. She brought in her laptop and played movies, the two of them providing sarcastic commentary like teenagers at a cinema. Preston's appetite had faded, but Maya convinced the hospital kitchen to send up better food, and they shared small bites of chocolate and fruit, savoring tastes more than sustenance. On particularly hard days, when the pain medication left Preston foggy and confused, Maya simply sat beside him, holding his hand, her presence a steady anchor. On his clearer days, they played chess. He usually won, and debated everything from politics to whether cats or dogs made better pets. Cats, Maya insisted. They're independent and dignified. Dogs are loyal and affectionate, Preston countered. Like me. You're comparing yourself to a golden retriever. Is that so bad? His smile was weak but genuine. I'm loyal, I respond well to treats, and I'm ridiculously happy when you walk into the room. Maya laughed, the sound mixing with tears. You're ridiculous. And you love me anyway, I really do. 3 months after Maya had first walked into room 412, Preston's doctor delivered the news they'd both been dreading. Days, maybe a week at most. Preston took it with the same stoic grace he'd shown throughout, but Maya saw the fear flicker in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. That night, she stayed again after her shift, and Preston asked, "Will you tell me about your sister's wedding? What's she planning?" It was such a normal question, so deliberately focused on life continuing beyond his own, that Maya's heart cracked further. She described the venue, the dress, the flower arrangements her sister had agonized over. Preston listened, asking questions, invested in details he'd never see. "I'm making her promise to name her first kid after me," Maya said, trying to keep things light. "Boy or girl, they're going to be little Preston." Preston laughed, then winced at the pain the movement caused. "That's a lot of pressure on a hypothetical kid. They'll live up to it." Maya took his hand. "Because they'll know they're named after someone extraordinary. Someone who built beautiful things and loved deeply even when it hurt." Maya. Her name was barely a whisper. "I'm scared." It was the first time he'd admitted it directly. Maya climbed into the bed, gathering him as carefully as possible into her arms. He was so thin now, the cancer having stolen pounds along with time. "I know," she said into his hair. "I'm scared too." "Of what?" "You're not the one dying. I'm scared of a world without you in it. I'm scared I won't know how to do this job anymore without thinking of you. I'm scared that loving you was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I only got 3 months." Preston pulled back enough to look at her face. Then promise me something. Anything. Don't let this destroy you. Don't stop opening your heart because it hurts now. His hand trembled as he cupped her cheek. Find someone else someday. Fall in love again. Have that perfect ordinary day we talked about. Preston, please. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. Let me believe that you'll be happy. It's the only thing that makes this bearable. Maya kissed him, tasting salt and sorrow. I promise. But not for a long time, okay? Let me miss you properly first. Over the next few days, Preston slipped in and out of consciousness more frequently. His pain was managed now with serious medications that left him drowsy, his moments of clarity becoming shorter and more precious. Maya rearranged her schedule to be there as much as possible, sitting vigil beside his bed, talking to him even when he couldn't respond. Claire visited one final time, her usual composure cracking as she said goodbye to the boss who'd been more like family. Take care of him, she told Maya, then corrected herself. No, you already are, thank you. On the 5th day, Preston woke with unusual clarity during Maya's evening shift. She was reading emails on her phone, trying to distract herself from the inevitable when his voice cut through the quiet. Maya. She was at his side instantly. I'm here. What do you need? Nothing. Everything. His smile was faint. Just wanted to look at you, memorize your face. She took his hand, squeezing gently. I'm not going anywhere. You are, eventually, and that's okay. Preston's breathing was labored, but his gaze was steady. I want you to know something. These past 3 months have been the happiest of my life. Isn't that strange? Dying and finally learning how to live. You taught me too, Maya said through tears. You taught me that it's worth the pain, the love is worth the loss. Is it? Yes, she meant it absolutely. Every second. Preston's eyes drifted closed, then opened again with effort. The poem. The one from last week. Read it again. Maya picked up the book, finding the page she'd marked. Her voice shook as she read the verses about love and time, about moments mattering more than years. When she finished, Preston's hand squeezed hers weakly. Perfect, he murmured. Everything is perfect. Those were his last conscious words. He slipped into a deep sleep that the doctors explained was the beginning of the end. Maya stayed through the night, her hand in his, talking to him about everything she wished they'd had more time for. She told him about the garden she wanted to plant, the trip to Ireland she'd always dreamed of taking, the children she hoped to have someday, who would hear stories about a man named Preston James, who taught their mother about courage and love. He died just before dawn, the sun beginning to paint the sky the same colors it had been when they'd first truly talked. Maya felt the moment he left, the subtle shift from presence to absence. She stayed beside him for a long time, crying quietly, holding his hand as it grew cold. Linda found her there an hour later and gently encouraged her to go home. Maya nodded but couldn't quite make herself move. How did you walk away from someone who'd changed everything? He left something for you, Linda said softly, producing an envelope. His assistant Claire dropped it off yesterday. Said he'd prepared it weeks ago. Maya's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter in Preston's bold handwriting, grown shaky toward the end, and a key. The letter read, Maya, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're probably devastated. I'm sorry for that. Sorry for leaving, sorry for the pain, sorry we didn't have more time. But I'm not sorry I loved you. That was the best decision I ever made, even if the timing was terrible. I've arranged something, and before you argue with my ghost, just accept it. There's a house on the coast, about 2 hours north. Small place, nothing fancy, with a porch facing the ocean. I bought it last month and had it furnished. The key is enclosed. It's yours. No strings, no obligations, just a gift from someone who loves you. Go there when you need to breathe. Take vacations. Maybe someday, live there with someone who makes you happy. Have that perfect ordinary day we imagined. Don't mourn me too long, Maya. I got my happy ending. 3 months of love was more than I deserved and exactly what I needed. Now go live enough for both of us. Forever grateful, Preston. Maya clutched the letter to her chest, laughing and crying simultaneously. Even in death, he was taking care of her, planning ahead, building something that would last. The funeral was private but well attended. Business associates, construction workers who'd known Preston 20 years ago, people whose lives he'd touched in ways Maya was only beginning to understand. She stood beside Claire during the service, and when it came time for eulogies, Maya surprised herself by standing. "Preston James taught me that there's no such thing as too late," she said, her voice carrying across the chapel. "He packed more living into 3 months than most people do in a lifetime. He loved fiercely, laughed easily, and faced the impossible with grace. He was my patient, my friend, and the love of my life, and I'm better for having known him." The words were inadequate, but they were true. She sat back down, Claire squeezing her hand in silent support. Maya took a week off after the funeral, the first real break she'd had in years. She drove north along the coast road, following the directions Claire had provided, until she found the house Preston had bought. It was exactly as he described: small, weathered, perched on a cliff with a porch overlooking the Pacific. She spent 3 days there, walking the beach, crying when she needed to, laughing at memories that ambushed her at odd moments. She sat on the porch with coffee each morning, watching the sunrise and talking to Preston as if he could hear her. Maybe he could. She liked to think so. On the 4th day, she returned to St. Catherine's. Linda welcomed her back with a careful hug, and Maya dove back into her work with renewed purpose. She cared for patients with the same dedication, the same compassion, but something had shifted. She wasn't afraid of attachment anymore. Preston had taught her that love, even love that ended, was a gift. Months passed. Maya attended her sister's wedding, standing as maid of honor and crying through the vows. She adopted another rescue cat, naming him Preston over her sister's protests that it was morbid. She took up painting, terrible abstract pieces that she hung in the beach house during monthly weekend visits. She dated occasionally, when friends pushed hard enough, but nothing serious developed. It was too soon, her heart still tender. But she kept her promise to Preston, remaining open to possibility even as she grieved. A year after Preston's death, Maya found herself back at the beach house for the anniversary. She'd brought flowers to place on his grave earlier, and now she sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, a glass of wine in hand. "I miss you," she said to the night air. "Still, always. But I'm okay. You'd be proud of me. I'm living, not just existing. I'm taking chances." The wind picked up, rustling through the beach grass, and Maya smiled. She could almost hear Preston's response. "Good. Don't waste it." She went inside and pulled out her laptop, drafting an email she'd been considering for weeks. A nursing conference in Seattle was looking for speakers about palliative care and the intersection of professional boundaries and human connection. Maya had a story to tell. 2 years after Preston's death, Maya met someone. His name was Tom. He was a teacher, and they connected at a mutual friend's barbecue over a shared love of rescue animals and terrible puns. He was kind and steady, nothing like Preston except in the ways that mattered most: his capacity for presence, his genuine interest in her work, his easy laugh. On their 3rd date, Maya told him about Preston, all of it: the love, the loss, the house on the coast. Tom listened without judgment, then said, "He sounds like he was an incredible person. I'm sorry you lost him." "Me too, but I don't regret it." "Good." Tom smiled. "I'm not intimidated by competing with a memory, but I'm glad you loved him. It means you know how to love deeply." They took things slowly but steadily. Tom met Maya's cats and her sister's family. They spent weekends at the beach house, and Tom never seemed bothered by the fact that another man had bought it for her. If anything, he understood it was sacred space, treating it with respect. 3 years after Preston's death, Tom proposed on the porch of the beach house during sunset. Maya said yes immediately, then laughed through tears at the rightness of it all. Preston had wanted this for her: the love, the future, the ordinary days stretching into years. They married quietly 6 months later, the ceremony on the same beach where Maya had scattered some of Preston's ashes. Her sister served as witness, and Tom's brother stood as best man. It was small and perfect, exactly what Maya wanted. "Preston would have liked you," Maya told Tom that night as they stood on the porch of the house that was now theirs together. "Yeah," Tom pulled her close. "Why?" "Because you make me happy, because you love me without reservation, because you understand that I'll always carry him with me and you don't see that as a threat." "Of course not." Tom kissed her forehead. "He loved you. That means he wanted exactly this for you. I'm grateful to him for that." They stood together watching the stars, the waves crashing below, and Maya felt the full weight of what Preston had given her. Not just the house or the months they'd shared, but permission to live fully, to love again, to believe in second chances even after devastating loss. 5 years after Preston's death, Maya gave birth to twin girls. She and Tom had debated names for weeks, cycling through family names and literary references. In the end, they chose Petra and Julia, one honoring Preston in subtle tribute, the other for Tom's grandmother. Maya held her daughters in the hospital, exhausted and elated, and thought about Preston's regret over never having a family. In a strange way, he'd helped create this. Without him, she might never have learned to love so fiercely, to commit so fully. His gift extended far beyond the beach house. Tom sat beside her, his hand on hers as they marveled at their daughters. "You okay?" he asked softly. "More than okay." Maya smiled. "I was just thinking about how much has changed. 5 years ago, I was sitting in a hospital room falling in love with someone who was dying. Now I'm in a hospital room holding new life. It feels full circle somehow." "Preston would be thrilled," Tom said, "probably making jokes about the twins causing double trouble." Maya laughed because Tom was right. Preston would have been delighted, would have insisted on being called Uncle Preston, would have spoiled them shamelessly. The ache of his absence was still there, but it had softened into something bearable, woven into the fabric of who she was rather than tearing her apart. They brought the girls home to the beach house. Maya and Tom had moved there permanently 2 years earlier, both agreeing that raising a family by the ocean felt right. Tom had transferred to a local school district, and Maya worked part-time at a nearby hospice, the reduced hours allowing her to be present for her daughters while still doing the work she loved. On quiet evenings, after the twins were asleep, Maya would sit on the porch and look at the stars. Tom usually joined her, bringing tea or wine, settling beside her in comfortable silence. Sometimes she told him stories about Preston that she'd remembered, funny anecdotes or profound conversations. Tom always listened with genuine interest, understanding that remembering wasn't the same as being stuck. 7 years after Preston's death, the city dedicated a new public library that his company had designed before his illness. Maya and Tom attended the ceremony, the twins now rambunctious toddlers barely contained by Tom's patient wrangling. Claire was there too, still managing the company Preston had built, ensuring his legacy continued beyond his lifetime. "He'd be so proud of you," Claire told Maya during the reception. "You were all he talked about those last weeks, how you changed his life." It was mutual, Maya replied, watching Tom chase Petra around a sculpture while Julia clung to his leg. He taught me everything important. The library was beautiful soaring ceilings, natural light flooding through carefully placed windows, spaces designed for community and learning. A plaque near the entrance read, Preston James Memorial Library. The inscription included a quote Preston had once said in an interview. "We build structures to outlast us, but the real legacy is the lives touched along the way." Maya ran her fingers over the words, remembering the man who'd said them, the love they'd shared, the grief that had transformed into something like gratitude. He'd been right about everything: the importance of connection, the value of ordinary moments, the courage required to love fully even when time was short. 10 years after Preston's death, Maya woke in the beach house on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Tom was already up, making breakfast while the twins, now 7 years old, argued over which cartoon to watch. The coffee was brewing, filling the house with its familiar scent. Through the window, she could see the ocean, the same view Preston had imagined for her years ago. She padded out to the kitchen, kissing Tom good morning and settling Petra and Julia's dispute with practiced ease. They ate pancakes together, the four of them crowded around the table, discussing the day ahead: school and work and evening plans to build sandcastles on the beach. It was profoundly ordinary, beautifully mundane. Exactly what Preston had described as his perfect day, except now it was hers. She'd lived it, not just once but repeatedly, day after day, building a life from the foundation he'd helped her discover. After breakfast, Maya walked down to the beach while Tom got the girls ready for school. She stood at the water's edge, letting the waves lap at her bare feet, and spoke to the memory of Preston James. "I did it," she said softly. "I found the happiness you wanted for me. I built a life full of love and ordinary miracles. And I never forgot you. You're woven into all of this: every good choice I made, every moment I chose to be brave instead of safe." The wind carried her words away, and Maya smiled. She didn't need an answer. Preston had already given her everything she needed: 3 months of unlimited love that had taught her how to live fully for a lifetime. She turned back toward the house, where her family waited. Tom stood on the porch with the twins, all 3 of them waving. Maya's heart swelled with the impossible beauty of it all. The life she'd built on the foundation of loss. The love that had survived death and bloomed again into something new. Preston had been wrong about one thing: limited time hadn't meant unlimited love. Love itself was unlimited, transcending time and loss, and even death itself. It transformed and grew and found new expressions, but at its core remained constant: the choice to open your heart despite knowing it could break. Maya waved back at her family and started walking toward them, toward the life she'd been brave enough to build, carrying Preston's memory and Tom's love and her daughter's laughter like treasures in her heart. The beach house Preston had bought her was no longer a monument to grief but a home filled with joy. The perfect ordinary day he'd imagined had become her reality, not despite the pain but because of it. She reached the porch, and Tom pulled her close. Petra tugged at her hand, demanding attention. Julia was already racing toward the car, declaring they'd be late for school. It was chaos and comfort, everything beautiful precisely because it was real. "Love you," Tom said, kissing her temple. "Love you too," Maya replied, meaning it with her whole heart. But in the quiet spaces of her mind, she added a silent thank you to the man who'd taught her how. Preston James, terminal billionaire, who'd given her unlimited love in 3 short months and changed the trajectory of her entire life. That night, after the twins were asleep and the house was quiet, Maya sat at her desk and pulled out the letter Preston had written her. She'd read it hundreds of times over the years, the paper worn soft from handling. But tonight she read it with fresh eyes, understanding it differently now. He'd told her to live enough for both of them, and she had. But more than that, she'd lived for herself, for Tom, for her daughters. She'd taken Preston's final gift, his love and his house and his blessing, and transformed it into something neither of them could have predicted. A full life. A happy ending that was also a beautiful beginning. Maya carefully refolded the letter and placed it back in the box where she kept her most precious memories. Preston's watch that Claire had given her after the funeral. Photos from their 3 months together, stolen by nurses who'd understood what they were witnessing. The key to the house, now worn smooth from years of use. She walked out to the porch one final time before bed, looking at the stars scattered across the dark sky. Somewhere up there, maybe Preston was watching. Maybe he could see what his love had built, not buildings or monuments, but a life lived fully and well. "Thank you," Maya whispered to the night, "for everything. For the pain and the joy and the courage to keep going. You'll always be part of this, part of me." The ocean whispered back, timeless and constant. Maya stood there for another moment, then went inside to the warmth of her home, to the man who loved her and the daughters they'd created together. She climbed into bed beside Tom, who murmured sleepily, and pulled her close. And in that perfect ordinary moment, Maya knew with absolute certainty that Preston had been right. The real legacy wasn't in buildings or wealth or even in years lived. It was in the connections made, the love shared, the courage to open your heart even when, especially when time was running out. She'd cared for a terminal billionaire, unaware that their limited time together would teach her about unlimited love. And in learning that lesson, she'd found not just happiness but wholeness. A life built on the foundation of loss, stronger precisely because she'd been brave enough to love despite knowing the cost. Maya closed her eyes. Tom's heart beat steady beneath her ear and felt at peace. The story that had begun in sorrow had transformed into something beautiful. Preston's gift hadn't just been the house or the months they'd shared. It had been the permission to keep living, keep loving, keep believing in tomorrow even after everything fell apart, and she had. Against all odds and through all the pain, she had built something extraordinary from the ashes of goodbye. A testimony to the man who taught her that love wasn't measured in years, but in depth, in presence, in the willingness to show up fully even when the ending was already written. As sleep pulled her under, Maya's last thought was of gratitude. For Preston, who'd loved her. For Tom, who loved her still. For the daughters sleeping down the hall. For the beach house standing strong against the ocean winds. For all of it, the joy and the sorrow, the hellos and goodbyes, the limited time that had somehow contained unlimited love. And in the morning, she would wake to another perfect ordinary day, carrying Preston's memory forward not as a weight but as wings, helping her soar higher than she ever could have alone. The terminal billionaire had left behind more than buildings or wealth. He'd left behind a woman who understood that every moment mattered, every love was worth the risk, and limited time could teach unlimited lessons about what it meant to truly live. The house by the ocean stood witness to it all. The porch where Preston had imagined happiness now holding the reality Maya had created. The perfect ordinary days he'd dreamed of were her daily existence, proof that love transcended death, and that endings could birth new beginnings more beautiful than anything imagined. Maya Anderson had walked into room 412, a competent nurse. She'd walked out forever changed, carrying the love of Preston James like a lantern lighting her way forward. And in the years that followed, she'd honored that love not by holding on to it so tightly she couldn't breathe, but by allowing it to transform her, to teach her, to make her brave enough for the next chapter. That was Preston's true legacy. Not the buildings bearing his name or the billions in his accounts, but a single life lived more fully because he'd shown her how. One woman who'd learned that caring for someone dying could teach her how to truly live. Who discovered that terminal didn't mean meaningless, that limited time could hold unlimited depth, and that love, real love, never truly ended. It simply transformed, finding new expressions while honoring what came before. And in that transformation, in that brave choice to keep your heart open despite everything, lay the real miracle. Not in avoiding pain, but in loving anyway. Not in lasting forever, but in making every moment count. Maya had learned well. And as she slept peacefully beside her husband in the house her first love had bought her, the ocean kept its eternal rhythm, waves returning again and again to shore. Endings and beginnings, loss and gain, grief and joy, all woven together into something larger than any single moment. A life well lived, love well given, lessons well learned. That was the true happily ever after, not perfection but presence, not forever but fully. And Maya Anderson, once a nurse who'd cared for a dying billionaire, now a woman who'd built happiness from heartbreak, embodied it all. Preston's final gift, unwrapped slowly over years, blooming into something neither of them could have predicted but both of them would have celebrated. The story that began with death had become a testament to life. And wasn't that, after all, the whole point? To love so well that even loss couldn't diminish it, to build so carefully that even grief couldn't destroy it, to live so fully that limited time revealed its secret truth that love, real love, was always unlimited, always enough, always worth it. And so Maya slept, carried forward by the past into an ever-unfolding future, proof that caring for someone in their final chapter could illuminate every chapter that followed. Preston James had taught her well, and she had honored that teaching by living it, breathing it, becoming it. That was the real story, not of ending but of transformation, not of goodbye but of carrying forward, not of limited time but of unlimited love that rippled outward, touching everything, changing everything, making everything more beautiful and more real. The ocean agreed, whispering its ancient wisdom to the shore. And the house stood strong, shelter and symbol, holding space for the life that love had built.